So if someone is in this kind of a situation, right? If their parents are quite defensive and they don't have the means yet to be independent, like how would you tell them to navigate through that situation? It's hard, but like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are degrees to it, but
Hmm.
my heart really does go out to young people, young
Yeah.
person. It is a bit like living in a war zone. I mean, you can set up emotional boundaries, but there are degrees.
Hmm.
There are limitations to that. So survival strategies. It's not about fixing them. I think there's one thing that we need to say. It's very important. It's not about changing your parents. It's just about protecting yourself until you can create even more distance. Your safety
Hmm.
comes first. If you are in a situation where you can't leave, then at least keep yourself psychologically safe. Perhaps by there are many. It depends what you're really struggling with, but let me think. Well, not buying into the shaming, defensive parents may try to make you feel like everything is your fault because everything comes back and there's never any room for you to express anything. Whilst that's hard, try not to take your emotional reality as the actual reality.
Hmm.
So, yeah. And for emotional survival, see if you can be more of an observer. So rather than being very personally in the warfare of it, quote unquote, try to be an observer of your parents' behavior, like, oh, like an anthropologist almost. Like,
Hmm.
okay, so here are what would trigger this person. Oh, so how should one manage the space with them? And almost be very matter of fact and documentary like, okay, what kind of topic usually set them off? And maybe even make notes about it, almost create an operational
Hmm.
menu for it. Like, okay, I know that these are no-goes. I can't talk to them about this and this and this. Or like, oh, on these and these days, they are the most reactive. And so be a bit of an objective observer to it. You can also learn how to do this strategic grayscaling, like learning to be not very invested, not in a passive, well, maybe a bit, but not super passive aggressive.
Hmm.
Just be like a bit more withdrawn and take a step back. And it's not because that is your default reaction to everything. It's just because if someone has left you with no choice, distancing might be your only option. So maybe in order to not escalate the drama or an argument, just give a very short answer. I think on a deeper level, it is, again, I suddenly jump quite quickly from the survival tactics and the interaction to what you
Hmm.
do internally. I think internally that's more important, which is to grieve. Quite honestly, I think I can't
Yeah.
give you a manual of how to talk to your parents because you would be an expert in that and all parents are different. But
Hmm.
for your heart, what you need to do, I say you to the person who have a
Yeah.
defensive parents, is to grieve. Grieve the parents you want but can't have. Grieve the parents that you ideally would like. Grieve the parents that you see in other families and imagine that they are wonderful and you don't have that. Grieve the childhood that you feel you want but are
Hmm.
not having. And if you can do that and you can reconcile with the idea that, okay, this is my parents and because of their limitations, this is the way they are and these are the conflicts that we have, then the how, the what to do is easy. Yeah. You know,
Hmm.
yeah, it's because
Got
often
it.
we
Hmm.
escalate an argument because we keep wanting from the parent what you feel you deserve. Like you go on and on with an argument because you really want them to apologize. You want them to be reasonable. You want them to talk to you with logic, and they just can't. And they're not always in the emotional space to do that. And the more you try, the more you push, the worse it gets. But why would you push? You push because you haven't grieved it. You haven't accepted that this is the case. You still
Yeah.
try. You still want to get the parents you want. You still want to have a parent who's reasonable and
Hmm.
not defensive, basically. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, you mentioned like obviously don't try to fix them, for the reasons
Yeah.
that we just spoke about. It's going to feel like an attack, right? Which is obviously not going to get anywhere. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just an ongoing loop. I think trying to change anyone is never wise. You can be
Yeah.
supportive and stuff,
Hmm.
but trying to change, especially trying to change their response, trying to change the way they are, trying to micromanage how they react to things you say, that's gonna make you feel hurt. It's not that it's
Hmm.
morally right or wrong, it's that it's not productive. It's not gonna get you very far.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you also mentioned, obviously, if you're kind of stuck in that situation, one of the best things to do is just to not like pretty much like don't attach your self image to their words, right? Like don't,
Yes.
I guess, take
You
it too
put it better than
personally.
I did. Exactly.
Yeah, but no, because that's important, right? Because so many people, like obviously as kids, like your parents are like gods. You know what I mean? Like you value everything that every like facial expression, everything is like deeply internalized, right? So the more that you can kind
Exactly.
of move away from pretty much what you spoke about, like just don't attach your self image to their words, and then be more observational, right? To see like how
Absolutely.
things are working, how they react. And again, I guess for you, the more healthy habit to really do is to get into the process of like grieving, right? Because like when you accept it, now you're not gonna have like this overreaction yourself as well, right? So can you go a bit deeper on how people can do that? Like how can they grieve in a way where they actually accept it? Because it's so hard to do, and oftentimes it takes years on end to actually do that for most people, right? Because in our society, it's like family and parents are like put on a pedestal, right? So no one truly wants to accept it because it makes them feel like they're not living, in accordance with what society is saying. You know what I mean? So like, how do you grieve in a way that's healthy?
Whew. Well, first of all, I want to say, acknowledge that you've said something really important. That is,
Mm-hmm.
what did you say? Not to take their words. And yes, because the very important point is that as children, we just naturally define ourselves based on how we were treated by our parents. That is so very
Yeah.
natural. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
listening to this as an adult, and you reflect on a lot of the more dysfunctional behavioral patterns or relational patterns or even low self-esteem, you may find the root in the fact that you had the defensive parents, and when you were younger, you've internalized a lot of their responses as your self-definition. So just rolling back on that is part of the grieving, or a grieving is a part of that, in painful and important, and it's not a quick fix. So the
Mm-hmm.
grief, to be clear, we're not talking about. I think to some people, even the word grief is a bit jarring and
It's like
confusing, because when
death.
we say
Yeah.
grief, yeah, exactly, we immediately think of a death and a loss. But we're actually talking
Mm-hmm.
about, like I said earlier, grieving the parents you needed, the childhood you deserved but didn't have. It's grieving lost time, lost opportunities, things you can't see, the things that could have been, the might have been, the fantasies. Um, and it's time to grieve when you've tried and nothing changes, and you just catch yourself still hoping that this would be different. Maybe this time they will understand, and deep down you know it won't. Um, and sometimes you have to rock bottom, like you hit a point where
Mm-hmm.
you feel so much despair about things not changing, because I'm kind of not answering a question because I really want to psychologically prepare the listener that it's not as simple as we're putting it in this 30 minutes conversation. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of,
Mm-hmm.
right, I'm going to start grieving now. I'm going to have to accept that. And from now on, I'm not going to have false hope. And then you find yourself going back into it 1,000
Yeah.
times. It's very common. I've done it. People have done it through centuries. It is so common because yeah, we will catch ourselves having the same conversation in our head, planning and doing all of that. And when we do that and we fall back into the loop, to have so much compassion. Because we're
Mm-hmm.
grieving someone who's still alive. We're grieving in a relationship that is still alive. And that's a complicated thing that society hasn't really prepared us for. There's no ritual around there. There's no formula around there. We have to do it in our own
Mm-hmm.
ways. And we'll find that emotions come in waves and layers. Like sometimes we're angry, sometimes we're upset, sometimes we feel guilty for feeling angry. So I'm throwing a lot in there, but I think the principle behind is really to be soft and compassionate with yourself, knowing that it's not a one-time event and it would resurface
Mm-hmm.
as things happen and in different life stages. Yeah, it is
Mm-hmm.
a wave. So Don't rush it, don't push it, and just to every time you find yourself falling back into it, just say, there it goes again. I may fall back into the same pattern, but I have done a little more grieving this time. So every time you feel a despair, you know you're grieving, and actually feel almost a productive energy in it, and say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm grieving. I am devastated and disappointed, and I'm grieving. I'm grieving a little more. I may have hope again next time and try it again, and then feel
Mm-hmm.
very hurt again. I may, but I am grieving more, and I'm moving forward. So take
Got
it
it.
slow and not expect yourself to do right, grieving tomorrow. From now on, everything is different. I think that can
Mm-hmm.
happen maybe with some people, but I haven't seen it.
Got it. Yeah. So I guess, like as you mentioned, just be compassionate with yourself. Obviously, it's really hard for people to do this, right? Because again, it's your parents at the end of the day, right? And then again, like the whole main idea is to like drop any sort of like expectations that you might have in your fantasy about like what it should be, how it should be. Because again, as you mentioned earlier, like you can't really change people, right? The only people that can really change themselves are themselves. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
have to make that choice. You have to put in the work because no one's going to force you to do anything. You know what I mean? Like, it's just
Yeah.
not going to happen. And then again, just coming to that acceptance. It's just like, I mean, it is what it is. And again, get help from other people as well to help you go through the process. Each person's going to react differently. Some people need more support. Some people are kind of okay with, doing it in solitude if they're okay with that. But yeah, be compassionate, drop the expectations, and just accept it. I guess I know that sounds kind of blunt, but I guess that's really that's really what it comes down to, right?
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.